Good afternoon and good morning to everyone. Uh, we are here today. For, uh, is there an echo?
Um,
Sound is all right?
it's
There is
fine.
It's
feedback.
fine. Fine. Yes, yes. Apologies for that. So we are here today for a book discussion on the publication Celestial Mirror, the astronomy of Savai Jaising II, and authored by Professor Barry Perlus from Cornell University, and a very creative and really brilliant celebration of the astronomical observatories, the Jantar Mantar Observatories in India. We are joined here today for the book discussion. We have with us Professor Barry Perlus from Cornell University, and we really welcome you, Barry. We are so happy to have you here for this book discussion. And we have woken you up so very early for this, and you have very kindly joined us today. Thank you for joining us. And to move this discussion forward, we are also joined in this session by Dr. Mark Subbarao. Um, from the Adler Plan. Uh, Mark, perhaps for you, this is the earliest of time when we have asked you to come in. And so apologies for that, but many thanks for joining us today in this book discussion. We also have with us Anisha Shekhar Mukherjee, conservation architect who has had long association with aspects of conservation for the Jantar Mantar observatories, particularly the one in Delhi. And also, both Mark and Anisha have had a long association with Barry as this book has been evolving, and also in terms of usage of these brilliant and very evocative looks at the Jantar Mantar observatories in their usage. Perhaps both Mark and myself, I am from the Nehru Planetarium, New Delhi. So we have a role to play, which we will come in into the as we go in for the discussion, and as we get started in this, if I could just hand over to you, Barry, with just this one question to put to you. What drew you to these observatories? This has been a 30-year long endeavor of yours, and it was in a way there was a compulsion on you to give your time to this and consolidating this work in a very unique way of celebrating these astronomical spaces. So, if I could ask you to lead us through this, and if I could also request both Mark and Anisha to put in whatever queries they have to you, to Barry.
Um, well,
Ba-
Namaskar, thank you very much. And I think we'll perhaps should we do that once Barry has led us through his interpretation and his what he'd like to share with us today. Yes. So
yes, to you,
we'll
Barry.
look forward to Barry's starting off the session.
You're muted. Your mic is muted.
Okay. Sorry. Um, I'm.
Yes, it's fine now.
I should be good now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
There's quite a delay at my end, and I'm also getting a lot of feedback. Oh boy. I'm going to just do a quick sound check here. Apologies for that. was one of my sound settings, so I think I'm good to go. So let me just say, as an introduction, now, this is difficult. I'm getting a loop. I'm hearing myself about 10 seconds after I'm speaking.
Yes, yes, I'm trying to figure out where the feedback is coming. I have muted the rest of us while you are speaking. Mm, usually, I don't get these. I have muted the rest of us while you are speaking. Mm,
All right.
I don't get these. Do any of us have the YouTube session also open somewhere?
I don't.
Do any of us have the YouTube session also open somewhere?
No, I don't think so. All right. I think for me, the simplest thing will be to not hear myself back through the program. All right. I think for me, the simplest thing will be not hear myself. Can you hear me? Okay. I think this is probably going to be the best way to go. And maybe I'll just take.
Yeah, I think we are all right. Please go ahead. Uh, you are walking us through this the beginnings of this endeavor.
You're muted again, Barry.
Okay. Sorry about this. So again, this is the book.
You're muted again, Barry.
And okay. The book has a number of sections.
So again, this is the book. You're muted again, Barry.
And okay. The book has a number of sections. So it includes a section called Immersion, which is about 70 pages of photographs, panoramic photographs from the observatory. A section called Immersion, which is about 70 pages. And then the book really begins with an essay by Anisha that looks at the Jantar Mantar Observatories from a cultural, historical, and philosophical perspective. It brings really the whole context from really the beginning of understanding of space and time in the Indian culture, which is really important to understand. It's not something I understood when I first met the Jantar Mantars, but as I worked on the project and the book, it became much clearer to me that there was so much more historically and culturally behind these works of architecture and science. So from the essay, it moves to a section that I call explanation, which is another good 50 pages or so that looks at all different aspects of the observatories, really understanding the technical details, the locations. So there's site maps. There are explanations of the kind of observational astronomy that was underlying the design of the instruments, and then more detailed explanations of each of the instruments. At the end of the book, there's an afterword which talks about the process, kind of the whole evolution of the project, which spans 30 years, amazing to me, from the date that I first walked into the Jantar Mantar in New Delhi. And then finally, at the very end, and I'll just hop over there, there's a small series of the black and white photographs from 1989 that were the very beginning of the project. So that was a quick walkthrough. I'll be happy to go back and look at details, when we have questions or want to talk about more specific aspects. The whole book, really, it started in around 2013. It evolved over many different iterations. The immersion section, I owe a debt to Mark and the collaborations that we've done at the Planetarium, because it was really seeing the panoramic photographs in large scale, realistic, almost life size in the Planetarium, that made me realize immersion was such an important feature of one's experience in the observatories themselves, and also as a way of presenting them and talking about them. So I will trust that you have a few good questions and we can talk some more. I will trust that you have a few good questions and we can talk some more. Rathna, you're muted.
Oh, sorry, I didn't check that I was muted. And we are going to have, I'm sure, many questions between us and also from those who are participating through YouTube. Anisha, you had something you wanted to. We are going to have, I'm sure, many questions between us and also from those who are participating through YouTube. Anisha, you had something you wanted to. Anisha, you are muted. Could you unmute and repeat?
Yes, I've unmuted myself. Am I audible now?
Anisha, you are muted. Could you unmute and repeat?
Yes, I've unmuted myself. Am I audible now?
Yes.
So, yes, thank you. Well, Barry, I find the book very, very evocative, really, and I think it has a clarity and an immediacy about both the power and the potency of what the Jantar Mantars are about. And I think you managed to communicate very clearly both the aspects of their function as well as extraordinary aspects of their spaces. I was curious to know that when you first, came upon the Jantar Mantars, and of course you've been with them through such a long time now, but when you first entered them, let's say, the Jantar Mantar complex in Delhi, what did you make of it? Did you respond to it as a set of curiosities, or in terms of their architectural spaces, or did you perceive their function in astronomy? What was it that sort of engaged you at the beginning?
Yeah, it's a good question. The first experience was simply awe. Because I had seen some photographs for tour guides and things like this, but the reality was so powerful. So I would have to say it wasn't even really a thought. I was taken by the architecture. I was inside a campus of a completely different kind. I think as I processed it, I really thought about both the architecture and just the visual form, because I was there as a photographer. At the time in 1989, I was more interested in really ancient historical architecture, temples, really beautifully created sculptural works. So the Jantar Mantar wasn't even really on my plan of what I was going to photograph. But the more I experienced it and just lived with these incredible geometric shapes and forms and saw how the light fell on them, I responded and just spent hours photographing. So the first impression really was not so much thoughtful as visceral, and a response to the physical presence, and I would say the power of the forms. So later, really thinking about all the pictures I had made and what I hadn't done, I came to realize there was so much more to understand. So there was a long period really of thinking about the observatories and doing more research. And so it was probably 10 years till I could get back and reintroduce myself and then look at them in greater depth.
Thank you. That's it's very interesting that you say that, because one thing I was reminded of when you said that, it was, you weren't really thinking, you were just sort of being there and responding to them. It's part of the, I think, the Indian philosophical sort of what it aims for, the Indian philosophical tradition is to be in the moment, is to be sort of perceiving things with heightened attention. And it's interesting that you say that that's what you did, when you went into the Jantar Mantar without any sort of former introduction to it in the sense of being aware of in detail what they were about. So I think that's it says a lot both for you as a receiver and the Jantar Mantars as let's say givers of that sort of an experience.
I think, yes, that really fits.
If and one more question before if Mark and Ratna come on, is that now that you know them in far greater depth and you've spent so much time being with them, photographing them, studying about them, what is it that has changed in your understanding of the Jantar Mantars, and what is it? Is there something that has remained the same?
Oh, good question. So much has changed. And I guess that's one of the interesting things about a project that goes on for so long. Let me think of how to answer this briefly. Well, I think if I were to look at a chronology, what I would find is that the need to learn more always drove me to meet more sources and meet more people. My own colleague, the late Bonnie McDougall, is an architectural historian who had spent years in her doctoral work living in Sri Lanka and India, and she knew the observatories very well and had really studied them deeply. So she was a great source of inspiration for me. But every time I would learn something or meet someone new, it would open my eyes to some other new aspect of Jai Singh's work, of the history of stargazing and naked eye astronomy. And so the project would benefit from all of these encounters, and also being interested, as I am, in both science and art. There were always opportunities to learn something more, for example, about the scientific principles or the astronomical or mathematical principles. I think building the website was probably one of the biggest drivers that kept this project moving. And I think it's a little bit odd to be talking about the book, which is a physical thing, but is so intricately tied to the website. And the website was started in 2003, evolved to be more and more sophisticated. At this point, the book is smarter than the website, because the last 3 years have been focused really on putting content into the book. And now it'll be time to come back to the website and replenish the website from the book. But so I didn't really answer your question. I think probably the movement was from a fascination with the visual to a greater and greater appreciation of Jai Singh as a conceptual person and a designer. I know that he was responsible for the city plan of Jaipur, for example, which was quite novel for the time. Very orderly. He established all kinds of infrastructure that was new, I think, and very functional. So I think more and more I became appreciative of who he was as a person, as a scholar, as a designer. And understanding how the instruments work also enhanced my memory of my experiences. So anyway.
Yeah.
I was just sharing screen of the website jantarmantar.org for the viewers, and as you were saying, Barry, no, not just the book and the years of endeavor which went into the website and the observatory itself and the instruments. So we are going to have a discussion of all of these. Mark. Can I ask you to come in at this point? And I'm also checking the viewer questions which are coming in, which I will put in a while. So I'll ask you to come in, Mark.
Yes, yeah, I'm here. It was the website that connected me with Barry. I first encountered the Jantar Mantars on my first trip to India 35 years ago when I was just 18, and part of a whirlwind trip around the country. My father's from India. My mother's American, and it was his first time back since leaving for graduate school. At the time, I was an aspiring astronomer, so my uncle made sure to take me there, and I recall a similar experience to Barry, of just being sort of blown away by the space. I know nothing about it beforehand. I purchased a booklet while I was there. And then throughout my career, that was in the back of my mind. And when I started to work at a planetarium, I was looking at, it seemed natural to try to bring this into my work. And then encountering Barry's website is actually, and the amazing photographs there. Not just the 360 photos, which were very, very innovative at the time, but his equirectangular projections of them, which had this unique sort of appearance that led us to reach out to him and start a collaboration.
When you were doing your initial photography and the work, Barry, the panoramas came a little later, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the work. So how did it go in that direction?
Yeah, as I said, the first encounter, was with these sort of black and white photographs, very much about form, and it was a good 10 years when I had the opportunity, the funding to be able to go back seriously, and I had thought about how to approach really presenting the observatories. I was thinking they're so special to me. I really wanted everybody to know about them. And I had been experimenting with very wide angle cameras. So I thought, yes, it would be really important to be able to show the whole scope of these campuses and views. And let's see. maybe I've got, oh, there. So way in the upper right are a couple of photographs made with a film camera. This was not digital, but it was a very wide angle camera. I was in India briefly in 1999 and was testing out that kind of equipment. When I went in 2001 was really the beginning of the major work in the project. It was in December, and it was the year that Apple made public the first 360-degree VR technology. And I jumped on it. The equipment by today's standards was like toys. I had a Nikon Coolpix camera with about 3 megapixels of resolution. But I brought both film cameras and digital equipment for that first month of work because I wasn't at all convinced about the digital. But on my first day, I made tests of the panoramic photographic process, and I was so wowed by the results that I said, this is the way to go. From that point on, no more film. Everything was digital, and it has been to the end.
In particular, when you are taking what you see there in the observatory and putting it into the panoramic format, we as planetarian, Mark and myself, we find that this is something which is so very useful for us to bring it into a planetarium environment, as Mark did at their planetarium. Here are some of the visuals. That's you and Mark at their planetarium with your panorama kind of wrapped around in the dome, giving a feel that you are standing right there in front of the Brihat Samrat Yantra here in Jaipur. So these uh, for us, they have wonderful utility of bringing it anywhere in the world, giving that immersive feeling in a planetarium dome. So, in a sense, did you kind of envisage that direction of usage? And maybe you and Mark could tell us about how in the Adler Planetarium all of these were utilized to give a people feel of being there at the observatories.
Sure. I think one of the strongest media experiences for me was the VR. And this, of course, is still, I'm talking about a smaller flat screen. But the idea that you can be looking at this spherical image and you're seeing only a window into it, but you can move the image around and it gives you the impression that you're there turning your head and looking wherever you wish. That was a real paradigm change for me. And I'll jump back to the planetarium in a second, but I just want to get this in, that as a photographer, we're so used to looking at the world in a framed view. You know, everything is framed and cuts out the rest of the world so you can just see this one scene or one thing you're looking at. But in panoramic photography, it's all open. Time is open. Your viewer will be eventually looking at every possible place in the scene. So as a creator, you're much more like a filmmaker thinking about a long scene where the camera moves and pans and events happen. And this really changed the way I looked at the subject, the way I looked at the observatory. It meant spending at least an hour planning and setting up for one picture, because you had to get the camera in exactly the right position so that everything looked good this way, everything looked good that way, everything looked good behind you, because eventually your viewer was going to turn around and look at everything. So that isn't exactly immersive, but it is what I think the power of the immersive experience is in the planetarium. as you know, in the planetarium, you sit there, but you can look around. You are exploring that world, which has become your world. It's on a screen, but you forget about the screen and you start to enter into it. And I think Mark can say much more about that from a visualization point of view. But that was the exciting thing for me, was seeing them and being able to be with them in the space inside the planetarium.
Yes, so that power to transport you to another place, and this source material is just a natural match. I think Barry had come to Adler for a couple of work sessions where we started to explore these ideas. One of the things we did was to import his panoramas into software called Worldwide Telescope. And this is free open source software that you can download. It's now supported by the American Astronomical Society. And that led to a couple of projects, but in particular, I think the photos that you showed, Rathna, one was from a feature planetarium show we did called Cosmic Wonder, which ran for 6 years. It's one of our most popular shows ever. And the theme of that was really, well, it focused a lot on Hubble imagery, and it had to do with sort of the inspiration that comes from looking at the sky. And we wanted to make the case that was an inspiration that has existed throughout time and around the world. And we really began the show. Actually, the very early on in the show, we start with a couple of the panoramas from Barry, and that was a scene from the opening of the show that we showed there. But I think the most fun project, and still throughout my career in the planetarium, I think one of the highlights was a lecture that Barry gave at the Adler Planetarium. In that, we again used Worldwide Telescope, but it's not just the panoramas that Barry had created, but he had built 3D models of the site and other resources. So it imported all of that. So, for example, we could fly from the Earth down into the site. We could see the 3D model. We created little spheres for the panoramas, and we would fly into the spheres, and they would envelop you, and you'd move from the photography to the 3D view. The lecture involved live musicians as well. It was quite the multimedia experience, and I think for me one of the most special days I've had in the planetarium.
I'm really looking forward to and hoping that we would have a similar experience at our planetarium too, in collaboration, Barry, Mark,
That would be
ahead
great.
time. There is one viewer question which I'm just right now flashing on to this. This is from Siddharth Madan. He is asking, is there any similar as detailed astronomical historic observatory of similar stature in the Western Hemisphere or anywhere in the world from the same period? So, uh, should I repeat that again? So that was about existence of observatories themselves, and in one way perhaps the Jantar Mantar is unique in this sense that from far time back in history to now it is in public space still. Many of the historical instruments, like in these kind of lines, like for instance maybe the sextants, quadrants, etc., at the Paris Observatory, historical from that time, would not be in public space as of now. So perhaps that is one thing which is very unique about the observatory, that we have historical astronomy where people can walk through as a park in the current day. I don't know if I am right in that, or there are others. Perhaps I mean others would correct me if there are such historical observatories in a public space
Not,
around in the world.
not that I'm aware of. And what's interesting also is that the scale, the physical size of these instruments, I don't think there are any like this. I mean, if you look at the Great Sundial, it's an extremely precise instrument, and it's on a scale that's unprecedented. There are, of course, many large-scale works that we consider astronomical in focus in all parts of the world, but they are from much earlier times. And I think that's one of the questions that's often raised here 100 years after the invention of the telescope. Why is Jai Singh building astronomy observatories that have absolutely no connection to telescope-based astronomy? And many people have tried to answer that, but I don't think there really has been an explanation that could convince everybody.
Well, both of you are right, I think, Ratna and Barry, that it's quite unique because masonry instruments of this sort, certainly from contemporary with the Jantar Mantar, don't exist. And part of the reason for the size of the instruments and the form of the instruments is the fact that it was always intended for public use, even though it was very much an act of royal patronage, but it was intended for public use. It was a stated explicit objective. And I think what is very heartening is that it continues to be in the public domain even today, though, of course, the historical astronomical function has been reduced over the years. So, I don't think there's anything really like the Jantar Mantar, the set of Jantar Mantar observatories anywhere in the world.
Yes, Jai Singh's intention that anyone can walk into the observatory and satisfy themselves as to what is it astronomers are doing. That is the functioning which, could continue all through. We don't necessarily have to ask the observatories to give us research kind of quality data, but it is a very useful laboratory for teaching. That, in fact, is one of the things we have been trying to celebrate.
Sure, you've been doing a lot of outreach activities there, and so have we as part of the Jantar Mantar initiative. But I think it's related to the fundamental question that Jai Singh was trying to raise, which is that anybody who's interested in the mysteries of the universe can actually go there for themselves and experience and question and observe, which is as true today as it was then.
Yes. Coming to the photography aspects, Barry, I was just wondering, when you are doing the 360-degree visuals and perhaps also no, just for the 360-degree visuals, if these are not being done simultaneously but perhaps done separately and being stitched together or so, would the shadow movement not trouble you, or were they being done simultaneously at one?
Well, the duration of
duration would be very short, of course.
It's fairly short, and shadow movement wasn't problematic. I think more unusual was random appearance of people and birds and things like this. But no, the shadow movement, it really is on another time scale.
And the shadow movement itself can also be celebrated through your kind of endeavors. Like on a day time scale, or even like on an year's time scale, on the Mishri Yantra, the Uttarayan and Dakshinayan movement of the sun through your kind of photography would come alive so wonderfully, except that it requires this very long period of keeping the equipment undisturbed in some way and so on.
Yes, when there are a couple of things that I would do if I had time and would go back. The whole process of doing time-lapse movies, I think there would be such a rich kind of collection of possible movies. There's so many places where the movement of the sun is so it's so important to the function of the instrument, but it's also quite beautiful to see. I captured a few when I was there, but didn't realize how important they were. So that's one of the things on my list. What would I do if I go back? Is many more time-lapse studies. I'm actually surprised it hasn't been done more.
Some amateur astronomers have done over a diurnal kind of time scale, and even some students trying to use image processing to measure the shadow movement
Uh-huh.
and so on. But this long term, we would need, of course, support from the ASI, of course, the
Sure.
Archaeological Survey of India, where they have been supporting all through for the kind of work that you have been doing, that we have been doing, Anisha has been doing, and but it would be worthwhile doing that year long kind of a time lapse for some of the instruments or the diurnal time scales and so on. And like in particular, like the image that you have right now in front,
Mhm.
in your screen share, where we are able to see the entire the
Sound.
Jaiprakash Yantra in one view, which is encompassing its entire functionality, can actually become, I mean, can be put together in that one view. So I do see that your way of visualizing has enormous pedagogic potential, and I mean, we have not yet utilized it properly, perhaps, and I'm hoping that we will in the coming period. It has enormous pedagogic potential, and while looking at some of your views, particularly in sharing them in the dome kind of usage, one does get that feeling. There is one of your images where I have shown it a couple of times, I think, which was shown in the Adler Planetarium. And I can
Mhm.
imagine sitting there in the planetarium chair and looking at this. And this view is the Jayaprakash from Jaipur,
Yeah.
and you are actually inside the instrument, and you are sitting just under where the functionality of it is on the surface of it. And I have sat there so many times while trying to take calibration observations.
Mhm.
And looking at this, I immediately get that feeling of remembering that time when I was there, sitting just at that point where this view is, and taking observation position of the sun throughout the day, and so on. So yes, it is really a wonderful. Maybe, I mean, some of the views that you have in this, because there are a few readers' questions coming in, viewers' questions about the functionalities also.
Mhm.
Perhaps if we walk through some of your images, and between us we could discuss those images and help maybe some of the viewers who have maybe looked into these observatories for the first time get a
Sure.
feel for what these are. Should we do that?
We
Mhm.
certainly can do that. Yes. Um, let me see the best maybe place to
Sure.
begin.
And so meanwhile, there was one question which was following up on some of the discussion that we had. One of the viewers has asked about why Sawai Jai Singh built these observatories in different places and so on. So
Right.
maybe that is again something which all of us could take up
Good
along with
question.
discussing the instruments. Yes.
Um, I can only say what I have read, and maybe Anisha can supplement this, but that he was interested in corroborating or making sure that the measurements
Yes.
were accurate by having sort of replica instruments in different locations. So much of the accuracy is dependent upon um, location, and if you think about the use of the astrolabe prior to these instruments, having multiple observations from different points on the Earth could help ensure that the celestial positioning is accurate. Um, there was
Yes.
also perhaps a kind of an outreach aspect
Yes.
to make the observatories a part of different parts of his kingdom or his the area that he was responsible for.
Yes, even within a single observatory, like in Jaipur, there are this repetition of instruments. The same measurement could be done in so many instruments. So we have the Ram Yantra, which will do both altitude and azimuth measurements, and we have the Digamsa, which will do azimuth measurement, and the Unnatamsa, which will do altitude measurement, and so on. So he did emphasize that even within that, and as you said, by constructing several observatories in different locations, making them available, the Varanasi one, for instance, seems to have been, apart from all the others, the Varanasi Observatory seems to have been maybe built more as a his own personal usage. It's a smaller one
Well,
built just. Yeah,
Yeah,
Anisha,
I think
you also.
it's related to a couple of things. One is a word that we used when we were, discussing the Jantar Mantras, and even the usage now, which is that of a laboratory. So I think we also have to remember that he was experimenting, because this was the first such venture, and so therefore the experiment was at various levels. At one level, it was in terms of scale, so which size is the best to get the most accurate readings, which is why there's so many versions of the Samrat yantra, sometimes in the same observatory complex. And also, again, corroborating the same sort of measurements through different instruments. The other thing was also of what he could do. So he was a governor of Ujjain. He was governor of Mathura for a while. Varanasi, his family had links with, because that's where they were sent to study traditionally. And the Varanasi Observatory is on top of the Man Mahal, which is their family mansion. So considering that it's a very urban space, that was probably the only area that was available to him. In Delhi, the area that he built in is Jai Singhpura, which is again part of the sort of the lands of the Jaipur, of the Amber family in Shahjahanabad. Jaipur is again his own area. So I think it was a question of what was available, what was possible, and what he wanted to do, which is essentially to make a lot of these experiments. So it was a true scientific endeavor in that sense. So repeated observations at repeated places to figure out what is the optimum sort of size and what are the optimum instruments for his purpose.
Great.
Right. Uh, there have been some questions from viewers about the usage. So, Barry, you are going to take us through views from your work, and maybe we could talk about the usage along the way as you tell us about your visualizations.
Sure. I think for this, actually, I'm going to start more in the conventional explanation section of the book. So what I have on screen is the Kapala Yantra, which is one of the smaller, simpler in a sense, instruments, but it contained so much of the conceptual modeling.
Yes.
So I don't know. Is this on screen now? Yeah.
Yeah, it's on
Yes.
screen. It's one
Yes.
of the really unique ones, right? It allows theoretical transformation between coordinates
Right.
as well.
Um,
Yes.
so let's see.
Yeah.
Then, of course, is the Jai Prakash.
Jai
And
Prakash.
one of the things that also helped in my understanding of the instruments was having to model them. It's interesting. You start to understand
Yes.
something better when you have to build it yourself. So
Yes,
this
that's so
is
true.
working from the drawings that were done over different periods of time. The 1918 drawings that were in the big archaeological survey publication. Other people had done measured drawings. I also wanted to mention how much I owe to Professor Sharma, V.N. Sharma, who
Yes.
did a comprehensive study of the physics and the mathematics of the instruments, spent a lot of time measuring them. His book, Sawai Jai Singh and His Astronomy, was my Bible. I mean, I was constantly going back for facts to that book. But anyway, so the Jai Prakash is, for me, one of the most beautiful concepts. It's a bowl instrument that has its origins, I think, in the Greek bowl instrument with a obelisk or pin in the center of it.
Yes.
And there's Dr. Sharma's book. But the Jai Prakash took that bowl and made it huge, and also located the observer inside the bowl. With the Kapala Yantra, you're standing around looking into it from outside. With the Jai Prakash, you can be on the rim above it looking down, but the real function was to be inside it, close to these curved indexes that you were measuring the position of a celestial object through a small aperture plate suspended overhead, and the alignment down onto the scale. So each of these scales, why are there two? Why are there two bowls? Each of the scales is an hour of time. It's a 15-degree arc. And there's a space of 1 hour in between them for the observer to stand. So you can see there's an image on screen over here. I don't know if you can see the pointer, but
sorry,
it's okay. There's a shadow image of the guide plate.
Yes.
And that's showing an exact alignment of the sun with a point in this hemisphere, which represents the celestial sphere. So
I'm just trying to put an overlay. Yes.
When that, of course, that's moving over time.
Yes.
Yeah. And when that shadow reaches the end of the scale,
yes,
it appears in the second instrument.
That's right.
So this is a 24/7 functioning instrument. And in order to be able to get somebody down inside, he had to divide it into two parts that are exact complements of each other. If you were to take one and put it down in the other, they would form a complete filled-in hemisphere. But he cut them apart, and I think that was extraordinary concept of engineering and design to be able to make this instrument work every minute of the day or night.
Yes. And the same thing was also done to the Ramyantra.
Yes.
The cylindrical instrument, which was only measuring, of course, which is measuring local coordinates, whereas the Jay Prakash being a spherical instrument, any coordinate framework, that's the beauty of that instrument. It's a complete astronomy instrument, the Jay Prakash.
Yeah.
And the Delhi instrument, actually, many of them, the markings have been missing. Very recently, a large number of students working with them, we have tried to actually make temporary markings on it. And this is my question for you, Barry, and for Anisha. With the group of students, we were trying to make the markings on the Jay Prakash because it's a spherical instrument. It was not so easy, and we finally found out that the only way we could do it was by kind of maybe at one point taking string and stopping it at one point, using it like a compass and marking circles in the and this was, I mean, our thought at that time that perhaps this was the way originally the markings were done. So I would just like your comments on that perhaps by using strings like a compass and putting them at the center and then taking chord lengths required for the angles, we made markings on Jayaprakash, Anisha, a couple of years ago. And we were thinking that perhaps this is how originally the workers did it.
Yes, well, the Samrat Siddhant, which is the book by Pandit Jagannath Samrat, which actually documents the processes that went into making the instruments. So, for instance, they talk about the chord even when you're making the quadrants of the Samrat Yantra, and they talk about actually cutting like a firma, like a D, in the like a two-dimensional semicircle to scoop out the basic form of the Jai Prakash. And chords, in any case, are very important in the traditional Indian method of construction. It's also called praman, which is like the evidence if you look at it as an English translation. So yes, what you sort of hit upon, I think, is very much the method which would have been used for the construction of the yantras. And I think it's a fascinating exercise, what the construction entailed, and it has many lessons for us today. And maybe one could, actually do a sort of a project where we explain the construction with the instrument, and I think that would help a lot.
Yes.
Both the complexity of it and how it was engineered. So it would help to raise awareness and appreciation.
Barry, what you were mentioning about the spaces for observers to walk in, which are there both in the Jay Prakash as well as the Ramyantra, actually that touches upon. There's a question from a viewer, from one of our viewers, Pritpal, who is asking in the night time, how these measurements are done. In the daytime, yes, we are looking at the shadow of the gnomon, whatever is the gnomon in the instrument,
Hmm.
and in the night time, and those uh, gaps which you pointed out in the Jay Prakash, and which are there in the Ram Yantra, also the regions where observers have to stand at the night time and keep their eye in level with the surface which is used at the daytime, and look at the celestial object in line with the gnomon. And perhaps again in this connection there must have been additional need for some instrumental structures, as pointed out in the book by Professor V.N. Sharma. Like, because there is a curvature of the Jayaprakash instrument, if you are standing in the gap, your eye has to be in level with the curvature. So he has mentioned that maybe there were additional small pieces of instruments which would keep it in line in the instrument. And so these while you are doing the modeling also, Barry, these aspects of the hemispherical surface and the markings which are there on it, do your models also have the markings um, marked
Uh,
there, particularly for the Jayaprakash? Because that would be very useful for the restoration work.
at this point, the modeling does not have detailed markings on the index or on the scales. Um, I think they're primarily conceptual to explain the basic arrangement of the instrument, but they wouldn't function to actually do measurements. I have a question though, and this is for Anisha, because I think Sharma mentions that there may have been the use of a supplementary instrument
Yes.
for getting a precise positioning on the scale. I could not find any
Yes.
documentation or evidence of artifacts of what might have been the design of that and how it was used. I have one spread in the book about observing the night sky, which is to answer the question we just received. Um, the alignments are still the same, and instead of observing the shadow of the sun, you're looking back from the instrument, where you can look directly at a celestial object, which you can't do with the sun. And you're using the same guide points in the instrument to do that. So there is a visualization that I put in the book, to the best of my understanding of how that worked.
Yes.
But Anisha, do you know of the
Um,
actual tools that were used?
Well, you see, the Samrat Siddhant, it assumes that the reader has certain existing knowledge. So there's some terms used like sighting devices, which presumably at that time were clear enough for whoever was familiar with that tradition to figure out what exactly that sighting device was. But some of these sighting devices, when for instance, I went to the Jaipur Jantar Mantar as part of the supplementary research work for the conservation of the Delhi Jantar Mantar, and Pandit Sharma, who was stationed there and who was proficient in both traditional principles of astronomy as well as in Sanskrit. He demonstrated certain things in terms of the usage, let's say, of the Samrat Yantra to reduce the shadow, to reduce the sort of the penumbra effect that the shadow gives you in the Samrat Yantra. So I think this will require, it is generally the sighting devices that I mentioned. And in many cases, there aren't very clear instructions about what those sighting devices are. Because as I said, the presumption is that, whoever's using that is fairly familiar with the processes. So I think this requires perhaps some amount of correlated research between traditional astronomers and the text, but it's something that does need to be further clarified.
Some of the sighting devices which were more simpler in terms of rods, for instance, for the Kranti Vritta at the Jaipur, and for the Chakra Yantra, and so on. Some of these which are maybe sometimes not there, but they have been kept in storage. And so these are relatively simpler ones. But if
Yes.
additional instrumentation is required for the Jayaprakash, it is likely to have had been a number of circular plates according to the curvature. So that would have been quite a large body of supplementary
Hmm.
instrumentation. And as Barry is saying, yeah, that finding, I mean, I think even a documentary evidence that such was there, it is speculated by Professor Sharma that it is required. And also whether anywhere in storage such supplement, because so far all of us have had some interaction with the observatories, and one has not come across that
Yeah.
body of
Well, a
supplementary
lot of information
material.
was lost, because Jai Singh's library burned down. So a lot of information was lost. So I think perhaps it has to be a question of piecing together through both usage as well as accessing, traditional knowledge from even from practitioners, if we can find those. For instance, I mean, just as a corollary, I just remembered I'm reading the Maya Matam these days, which is essentially a treatise. It's a complete treatise on design at various levels, from the level of a seat to the level of a city. And again, there are certain things, so they give you very precise rules for dimensional proportions, for all the implements that you will use, from the rope, the an amount of twine that you use, the thickness, etc. There's certain things that they take for granted. So they say the site will be leveled according to the water method, and it's sort of understood that whoever's reading it knows what the water method is. And of course, we see in the Jaipur Jantar Mantar also the water channels that are there, to make sure that the levels are perfect. So there's a lot of, I think, implicit sort of knowledge that needs to be extracted, which requires a more concerted time and a pooling together, perhaps, of various kinds of disciplines.
Yes, and so there is a lot of ground for us all to cover in terms of still uncovering the mysteries of these structures,
Yes.
and ensuring that they are conserved and they are utilized in the way the creator intended. And
Absolutely.
all of these efforts go in that direction, and your celebration of the observatories through these visualizations, Barry, have a lot of potential in all of these directions, towards the utilization, also for preserving their structure as of now what exists, and then future directions. Maybe I would like to request from all of us some thoughts we have for the future directions in this, for the observatories themselves, and from all the work that we are doing for it. So Barry.
Well, I think one of the challenges, of course, we aren't able to travel now. Many of us. So the form of virtual traveling that we can do with a comprehensive view
Yes.
on the web is helpful. I am just in the sort of the release stage of a kind of a museum guide, sort of tour guide that is available for Android and iPhones, that has some of the panoramic content and modeling and some of the examples that will be available to visitors. And also anyone in the world can do a virtual visit like that. But I think I should say that while they're extraordinary sites, the pressure on them from physical visiting is challenging. It's challenging for anyone to actually be able to experience the kind of presence that I did. I was so fortunate in 2001. There were many fewer visitors than there are now, especially since the Jaipur site became a World Heritage site. The place that I was able to go then, down inside the Jayaprakash, is now closed.
Yes.
I think this is a problem with any historic site, that we want people to be able to see it, but to see it puts enormous pressure on preserving it. So I think in one sense, a virtual museum of the observatories is very important.
Yes.
And the more realistic and the more elaborate and the more immersive it can get, the better. But I also am sure there are ways to manage the physical visitation. I spent a little bit of time teaching in Rome, Italy, and visited many, many historical sites that have been carefully managed and enable visitors to see even really sort of ancient ruins preserved sometimes behind plexiglass. But it takes a lot of commitment from state and from governments in partnership with the private sector to do these kinds of conservation efforts. But I pass the microphone over to you guys.
Mark?
Well, picking up on the virtual tour, I'd love to see a proper full-length planetarium show.
Yes.
Perhaps this is something we can all collaborate on. That really digs into the science, the history, and the art. So I think that it would be a powerful way to take people around the world.
Anisha, your thoughts on the actual physical conservation of the observatories?
Well, you see, we've been involved with the Delhi Jantar Mantar since 1999. One of the things we realized, and one of the things that we've constantly tried to both foreground and convince the official custodians who are the Archaeological Survey of India. So this was part of a public-private partnership which was initiated by the Park Hotels, who wanted to invest in and to bring to people something in their immediate neighborhood, which was the Jantar Mantar. And that was a starting point. But what we realized as I went and did repeated studies and research was that the most important aspect of these complexes is a functional aspect. And unfortunately, for a very long time, they have been conserved or seen as archaeological remains. And that completely sort of, it reverses very often, even with the best of intentions, the purpose of the instruments. So my sort of hope and vision for the Jantar Mantars is where their function gets precedence, both in terms of the conservation philosophy. So in fact, what we enunciated as a conservation philosophy ties up with what Barry and you and Mark have mentioned. One of the things is the pressure on the site. So how do you combine the pressure on the site with the original intention of making it accessible? And in fact, that's possible. So the visitor movement plan that we generated actually, helps to do that, because at the moment, it's a continuation of an English landscape garden sort of. This is especially true of the Delhi Jantar Mantar. So there been, for the longest time, right from the colonial period, they were seen as interesting, pieces, and they were conserved as follies in an English landscape. So with views and tall palm trees, which are again completely sort of, they interfere with the notion of an observatory, because you need unimpeded access. So what I would hope and work towards, continue to do so, both through outreach or writing or interaction with people, with the custodians, is to foreground the fact that the historical function of the instruments is their most important aspect, which we need to conserve. And that in turn affects everything, whether it's site interpretation, whether it is what we are resurfacing the yantras with. So instead of stone, which is conventionally seen as more durable, better to inscribe, which is not true. The lime plaster that was there initially on all the yantras, in all the observatories, is actually, as Dr. Rathnasree has also figured out in her repeated field activities, it's one of the best surfaces for shadow measurement. And it is one of the best surfaces in terms of actually protecting the yantras from water ingress and ensuring that you have a uniform protective layer over their very complex curves. So therefore, this is the most important aspect, and this is what we've tried to communicate repeatedly And there's been a change. I think the very fact that that astronomers are now involved in the observatory is a signal of that change. However, it's still a very fragmentary approach. So we've all experienced it. Barry's mentioned it, Mark's mentioned it, and Rathnasree's also mentioned it. The fact that the Jantar Mantars encompass several things. They're sort of an intersection of art, science, the sacred and the everyday, the practical and the theoretical, and we need to integrate all that. So if we do our conservation inputs as sort of just fragmentary sort of exercises, then finally we shall reduce both the presence as well as the function of the yantras. So it's a function that has to be celebrated, and it sets us all off on our own interpretation, as Barry's book also demonstrates very beautifully. So his 360-degree immersion is something that he's emerged out of his interaction with the observatory. But it's triggered that off. So it has a potential to do that, and we need to keep both those aspects open.
Thank you. Thank for all of you for the comments about the way forward that we are. While these processes are on way, the conservation processes are on way. One way, even though maybe perhaps fragmentary, but one way of celebrating this is to be there and use it, particularly use it for those who want to learn astronomy. That is where the best usage for this. That is one thing which we have been doing over a period of time. And here is a call to every one of you who are listening, and students in particular, to come in and join in this endeavor to learn about the observatory. And we need help from observers to know aspects of the observatory and even create templates. And in fact, that is where perhaps Mark and Barry, if through the modeling that is happening, even if it is possible to create exact templates for the restoration, because when they are restored with lime plaster surface, we have to accept that perhaps over a period of, they will not last as long as marble does,
No,
and so
that's
they
not
may
right.
need to be restored. They may need to be restored. Yeah, I know that. I know what you are saying, Anisha, that they are the best. As far as I also agree with your point. Lime plaster is
No,
the best from
yeah.
observation point of
Just
view.
in terms of
Yes,
longevity as well, if it's done the
yes.
correct way, it will last hundreds and hundreds of
Yes,
years.
yes. And if there is a need to do a little bit more of lead surfacing on the lime plaster, the existence of templates geared with exactly the dimensions of each of the instruments, a body of that existing will go a long way in helping. Like there is a restoration process ongoing from by the custodians, but they need help from astronomers to get the exact idea how to do the restoration. So creating templates for restoration would be very, very useful. And I have been working with students to do some of it, but it would be great to have help from experts like all of you to create mathematical templates for restoration. So that is one thing perhaps which we could together towards in future. And I'd like to thank all of you for being here, all the viewers who are there, and those who would be coming to listen in at a later stage. And one thought I had was that we have had a discussion of the unique visualizations that you have done, Barry. I wanted to use those unique visualization for each and every instrument and have a follow-up session which talks about the usage, the nitty-gritties of every usage of the observatory instrument, even as a documentation for future.
Sure.
So perhaps we will have a follow-up session of that kind to this.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you
So
so much. It's been very
thank you.
enjoyable to have
It's been a
Thank you.
pleasure.
Thank, thank you, Anisha. Thank you, Barry and Mark. You had to come in very early morning for this, but thank you for doing that. We
Problem.
will be ending the broadcast here, but as I said, there will be a follow up, and perhaps the link for the follow up would be placed at this. And so please be